Hey, friends. Welcome to Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio, Podcasts, and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. I'm also a divorced mom of 3 now grown kids and a recovering lawyer, a current Jewish educator, a spiritual counselor, and a divorce coach. I'm a divorce coach who is committed to transforming the divorce experience for everyone involved. Now, when we think about our life in the mess of divorce and then experience the moving through divorce, it's often hard to feel positive and imagine either an end to the crisis or a different experience in the future. And when we're worried about our next chapter after divorce, our first question is often, what's next? I mean, there wasn't even supposed to be a what's next, right? But how do I wade into that really dark, dark place? So now today's guest, Dr. Becky Whetstone, has experienced divorce herself and remade herself multiple times. Her life and her work guide us in how life isn't over after divorce. It's just beginning. So welcome, Dr. Becky.
Hi, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me on your show and for all the good work you're doing on this very important subject.
Thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to have you on the show. And I want to give our audience like a background on who you are before we get to the meat of our show. So here goes. Dr. Becky Whetstone, Ph.D., is a marriage and family therapist in private practice who specializes in trauma, codependency, and marriage crisis. A journalist and former features writer and columnist for the San Antonio Express News, she created a singles movement dedicated toward kindness, decency, and integrity in dating that became a South Texas phenomenon. Known as America's Marriage Crisis Manager, she's created a path for couples on the brink, guiding them through the marriage crisis process with purpose and compassion. She's the author of I Think I Want Out and What to Do When One of You Wants to End Your Marriage, which I have right here. And the book is about marriage crisis, and it's a primer to surviving. She's an avid blogger and media influencer dedicated to teaching couples how to have healthy relationships with themselves and others. She lives in her home state of Arkansas with her husband, 2 dogs, and a Sphinx cat. Welcome, Dr. Becky.
Thank you so much. Thanks for mentioning my cat.
Your cat is part of the family. Let's just go there.
Well, I'm a recent cat person. This is something new. And so I surprised myself because I didn't think I was a cat person. And she's actually now my favorite pet.
Wow. See, so this is about remaking ourselves, right?
That's the thing is surprising yourself because, you think, well, I'm not this kind of person or I'm not that kind of person. And then lo and behold, something happens and you learn something else about yourself,
Right. Right.
And so it's about being open, right, to different possibilities and different ways of thinking.
Yeah, it's so true because very often we hit this marriage crisis, which you and I will talk about, but we have never imagined an after because our life was always about being married and our identity was wrapped up in being a married person. And the story that we've told of our lives goes one way, and yet life happens. And, the saying is, man plans and God laughs, right? We have a plan, but life doesn't always go as planned. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. When you're in graduate school, there's certain themes that you study, and one of them is what predicts a person who's going to be relatively content in their life, and then what predicts a long-term happy marriage, what predicts divorce. And the healthy thing for happy marriages and happy adults is flexibility and ability to go with the flow.
Yeah.
So, those of you who, I deal with a lot of clients who might be uptight, anxiety prone, scared of the world, fearful. I urge everybody that's in that situation to get help and work on that, because that's not how you were meant to live. It
Right.
is a blockade, to your contentment moving forward. So, yeah, and I think that people who get left in divorce usually aren't thinking about their future as a single person, but the person who leaves them is. And
Yeah.
and a lot of those people get stuck in divorce fantasies, and they
Mm,
idealize what it's going to be like. And then when they get into it, I think they are unpleasantly surprised at it, that it's not the wonderful answer that they thought it was going to be. It didn't solve all their problems.
right. Right.
So a lot of this unhappiness is an individual problem as
Yes.
opposed to a couple's problem. So, I'm all about thriving after divorce. I don't think I would be doing any of the stuff I'm doing now had I not gotten divorced back in the 90s. I felt like I was somebody's wife back then, and I felt it, and people would look at me as if I was invisible. And then they go, "Oh, you're David's wife. Oh,
Right.
okay. You're of interest to me."
Right.
And I long to be seen for myself. So
Yeah.
even my ex-husband has said, "I don't think you would have propelled yourself like you have within our marriage. I think you needed to be out of it to grow into my own individual self
Yeah.
that's seen by herself and not as part of a couple."
Right. I mean, I think so much of what you just said, like to unpack it, there's so much there. You know,
Mhm.
we tell stories about ourselves and we
Yeah.
tell stories about our situation,
Mhm.
but wherever we go, we take ourselves with us, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
this idea that after the marriage, there's a fantasy world of how wonderful it will be, you know,
Yes.
you're still there and you still have your story and you still have your
Yes.
memories. And if
Mhm.
you have children, you are still going to be in a relationship with your spouse. So many of my clients are like, I just want him out of my life. I need to go, gray rock. That's a term I just heard, no talking, like nothing. And it's not realistic. And so helping clients see that, the vision they have for their future that's empty of connection with their past is unrealistic. Yet
Mhm.
they don't need to wear their past as a coat of armor.
Oh,
You know,
no.
they don't have to let it wear them down. So let me just ask you to start. I always ask my clients, or sorry, my guests, to tell me your story. How did you get here so that our audience knows?
Well, I was raised in Southern Arkansas by a traditional family, and probably the very tail end of the patriarchal kind of way of being. My mom was a housewife, my dad was a lawyer in a small town, and they sort of preached to the four daughters, and they had one son, but they preached to the four daughters that, you're going to go to college someday, because that's where you will meet the best men, and you will get married, and you won't it doesn't matter what you major in. You just get a degree so you can attract the best quality men, and then he will pay your bills and take care of everything for the rest of your life.
Wow.
So I
Wow.
was literally brainwashed, to be in that kind of frame of mind when I entered adulthood. And so that's where I was back in the 80s and 90s when I was first getting married and starting to have kids. And so I went along with the family plan and married a successful guy. He lived in Texas, and very few Texas men will leave Texas. So I had to move from Arkansas to Texas to be with him. And we got married and had two kids. And one thing that, and I just wrote a blog about this, I swear, this week, is he was so loving and so wonderful in the beginning that I thought I had hit the jackpot of all time with men, because he was cute and just had everything going for him. And about 6 months into our marriage, he slammed the door on me emotionally and, like, literally just shut me out and became cold and rejecting and not affectionate, not desiring of romantic, connection or anything like that. And he just turned toward his career and became a major workaholic. And so I spent the next 5 years begging him to come back out and play with me, and in that period of time, we did have 2 kids. And, but literally he was never home. He would leave before we woke up in the morning. He left about 4 a.m. every day. And then he would come home about 7:30 or 8 at night, eat a meal, and go to bed. So, and even on the weekends, he worked, or he had a weekend place where he would go work in the fields and cut down trees and stuff. So it's like he did everything he could, major avoid, like to avoid, being around us. So I didn't realize at that time that I was in a marital deterioration process, but I was. And so it came to pass that he did something at one time, which was literally he did not like who I voted for president in an election. And he said, "Well, since you voted for that person and that person won, then I am going to dock your allowance by 10%."
Wow.
Can you
Wow.
believe it? I mean, no one can believe it. And so I said, "Well, if you do that, it's going to be a bad year for us, And he did it. He did it. And he was making more money than ever. So it was not a financial need or anything like that. It was just purity, control, and meanness, and so I said to myself, I can't be married to someone who would do something like that to me. So I made a promise to myself to divorce within the year. And so I, in this 5 stages of a dying marriage, that was stage 4. So we were almost at death of the marriage at that point. And so within 6 months, I mustered up the courage to tell him that I wanted to separate, and I didn't know if I wanted to save our marriage or not, but I needed to get away from him or I was going to go crazy. So we went to a marriage therapist, and the marriage therapist said, "Well, I can't help you if you don't want to work on the marriage. If you're in a marriage crisis, you need to just go back home. And if you get motivated, Becky, to work on the marriage, then come back." So he sent us off into the ether to manage this crisis on our own. We made a mess. We acted like fools. We got divorced fairly quickly. And, now I've had 30 years to see how it affected us and our children and how things have played out since then. And about 12 years later, I went to graduate school to be a marriage and family therapist. And I just, it hadn't set well with me all those years about why couldn't that marriage therapist help us? Why couldn't that person tell us what to do and help us manage that crisis? And so when I go to marriage therapy school, I see they don't teach us anything about that in a
Mm.
marriage and family therapy program. But I did my own research when I had research opportunities and when I did my dissertation. And I pulled up all this fantastic information about people in marriage crisis and how to handle these things and how things are likely to play out. And I was like, why isn't anyone telling anyone about this? Right.
Yeah.
And so at the end of graduate school, I said, well, if nobody else is going to do it, I guess I have to step up and do it. So I just knew the information was so great and it really needed to be out there. So that was how the concept of my book came out. I've been trying to get the book out there for 20 years, but publishers would tell me it was too negative, because I don't save the marriage in the end. I'm merely telling someone how to handle a marriage crisis and how to separate if they do that, or how to have an amicable divorce, and all about how it affects the children and all those things, and also how to diagnose a marriage, how to know when you're in these stages of a dying marriage and all those things. So because I didn't magically fix every marriage, in the end, they thought it was too negative. And it took me 20 years to get the book out, and it just came out in February. So this is perseverance,
Yeah.
as I just, every few years, I kept coming back and trying to get the book out there and trying to get it out there. And we finally did. So in the meantime, I've been working with couples in marriage crisis for 20 years. I've developed ways of doing this. And the idea is to take the nasty out of divorce, and the fact that even though you're divorced, you're always going to be a family, and you will have to get together over various things over the years. And the children, if you have them, are of utmost importance, getting them through it, in the healthiest possible way. And so, I coach people on how to stay in a relationship respectfully. And then, I have to also teach them about blended families and how to do that in a way that doesn't damage their children. So there's a lot of aspects to it, just the healing and all that, and even my daughter, who's 35 now, tells me that her one wish in the whole world would be that me and her dad could be friendly.
Yeah.
And he just he's never forgiven me for walking out on that marriage. He just is super angry about it, and he won't be my friend. And it pains me,
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
can't do that, so.
So it's hard because every relationship is guided by different perspectives, right?
Mhm,
Two perspectives are part of that relationship.
mhm.
And if you can't step into the shoes of your partner, or your co-parent, your spouse, then it will be hard to move forward with grace, right?
Yes.
What you just expressed was that he's still angry. Like, you can
Mhm.
assess his emotional thermometer, but
Yes.
and understand that based on his personality and his um, patriarchal upbringing, he
Yes.
has this vision of what life is supposed to be, and he
Mhm.
doesn't have the power to shift it. Whereas
No.
you seek that in your clients, and you seek that in all of the people in your life, that like you can figure out how they're feeling because you know what it's like to step into the shoes of. And that's something I work with when I'm working with co-parents. Like, how do you step into the shoes of the other so that you can release some of your view of them as an object that must be controlled, you know?
And how do you do that, Lisa, with the people who are empathy free?
Right.
Who lack empathy altogether, and they're not going to be capable of stepping into someone's
Yeah.
shoes.
And for those of us who left marriages when there was a controlling person on the other
Mhm.
side, you know, they wanted us to do what they wanted us to do. And when we
Mhm.
didn't, then we were punished. And whether we're punished, you know, with our allowance being diminished, or with emotional punishments and the
Mhm.
silent treatment, or,
Oh,
a
yes.
host of other things, um, when you finally find the strength to walk out, that's a moment of clarity. But then what happens after you walk out, and how do you navigate life because you still have the conflict? So let's talk
Mhm.
a little bit about, what do you define, or marriage crisis is a phrase you use. So what do you
Mhm.
define as a marriage crisis? And then how can we move forward with a little more peace? But keep that in mind. We are halfway through our show, and we're going to take a quick break for a
Okay.
word from our sponsor. And we're back with Dr. Becky Whetstone. So we were just about to hear your definition of what is a marriage crisis. So
Yeah. It's when somebody, walks in the room and says, I think I want out. That's why I named my book, I Think I Want Out. Or I would like to separate, or I'm unhappy in the marriage. And the other possibility is that you found out something terrible, like your husband's been cheating on you for 15 years, or you find something that he robbed a bank or some huge thing that just creates a crisis in the marriage, where there's going to be a conversation about, can someone change and, correct these things and we can move on in the marriage, or is it best to leave? So my concept of marriage crisis management that I do is just cradling people from the moment that crisis begins and stabilizing them so we can have a conversations and kind of look under the hood of the marriage and see where we are, and really have, you know, understanding, who's capable of change and growth. And some people are closed-minded to it, so there's lots of things to take into consideration. Some people need a jolt, like a separation, to wake them up and motivate them to work on the marriage. So I oversee separations so that they're done with a rhyme, reason, and purpose. And then those that choose the divorce route, I show them how to do it amicably and oversee that. And then beyond that, I help them co-parent. I educate them about children of divorce, and how to handle if you decide to remarry again or blend a family, all the different dynamics about that you need to be aware of, so you can avoid the very common pitfalls that come with that. But a huge theme in my work is you're going to have to get healthy as an individual while this crisis is going on. It's a wonderful way to spend your time when you're not sure what's going to happen with your marriage. And no matter whether you stay married or you don't, this needs to take place. And it's something that you'll never regret. Is you just got to get healthy as an individual first and foremost. So that's the thing. Is so I'm going to tell people, like, you're going to come out of this better than you were, at least, as far as a healthy adult is. You're going to feel pain. You're going to be brokenhearted. You're going to feel knocked up, you're not knocked around, emotionally, but you will heal for the most part. But I need you to be able to take care of yourself and thrive and be strong as an individual after this. That's absolutely crucial.
Right. And so what I'm thinking, like, even how this ties to your story, that, we think we need to be the good little girl very often, and
Mhm.
whatever they say, do. And then when we step out of line and assert our own identity, which is, voting for a particular person,
Mhm.
and it could be anything,
Yes.
then we're all of a sudden no longer an object. We're a person, and we're a
Mhm.
person who needs to be controlled. So we need to reframe that and recognize that we don't have to be controlled. We need to get to know ourselves. And I think that's what you're talking about when we're moving through it and moving out of it. Like, we may not have known ourselves except in that box. So this gives us the opportunity to start to get to know ourselves so that we can
Mhm.
heal and move forward.
Yeah, a lot of us on the youthful side of our lives, we conform. Like, I conformed to what my parents wanted me to be until I got in the, situation where I was supported by a husband and it didn't feel right to me. And I became aware in that marriage that I needed to have my own power, my
Mhm.
own life purpose, and that being a housewife was not for me. So that marriage taught me what I wasn't,
Right.
and so I was starting within that marriage to go back to school and start seeking my own identity, as I was saying, and so since so many of us start off life conforming, we're going to have a a moment in our life where we decide to keep conforming for the rest of our lives and probably not be very happy and not
Mhm.
thrive, or you're going to shed like a snake skin the conformity and find out who you are and start living true to that person. And
Yeah.
that's the recipe for a healthy mentally and emotionally, adult.
Yeah. And so many people are afraid to do the work,
Oh,
right?
yeah. It just drives me nuts how fearful people are. I didn't know how fearful people were till I became a therapist because I've never been that afraid in
Yeah.
my life. I've always been kind of a, "Well, go for it." But I deal with, people that live terrified of their shadow almost, they're just so afraid of what other people think. They're afraid of failure. They're afraid of all these things, and it's such an obstacle. And I always like to ask them, who would you be without that negative voice in your head?
Right. Right.
And people tell me things like, "Well, if I didn't have that negative voice, I'd be more powerful than I could ever imagine."
Yeah.
And that's what I want. I want you, like a therapist can show you and teach you how to quiet that voice so that the voice you are hearing is the one is confident and reassuring and compassionate and lovingly nudges you towards your purpose.
Yeah. And that's it. Like sometimes we don't know what our purpose is, and we
Mm-mm.
need someone else to help us, to give us permission to
Oh,
get
that's a
to,
lot of it.
yeah, give us
Is,
permission.
you're not crazy to want to do this thing for yourself, or,
Yeah.
yeah, people beat themselves up all the time in my therapy sessions, and after they do it the first time, I won't let them do it a second
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Anytime you're beating yourself up, you're on the wrong radio station in your brain.
Yeah. I love that. It's just you gotta switch the channel because that's not
Yes,
where you need to stay. And
exactly.
no, and whether it's the voice in your head or your inner critic or however you want to
Mm,
define this space of self-judgment that weighs so heavily on us. When we're making that decision, if we're the one who's leaving, you know, or the decider, as you say in the book,
mhm, mhm.
um, we're so worried about everybody else, like the impact of our decision on our kids, on our parents, on our siblings, on our social circle. And
Absolutely.
we let that weigh on us more than the truth that we know inside, that we've got to move forward. And if we don't, like a shark, right? If a shark doesn't move, it dies. So we need to move forward.
Exactly, and I love to tell my clients who are facing divorce with trepidation or post-divorce, like, yeah, the thing that's new is maybe your future is a question mark, but you can embrace the question mark and tell yourself, like, and this is why it's so important to have a good relationship with yourself, is because you can tell yourself what I tell myself, which is, "Becky, I don't know what the future holds, but I trust myself to land on my feet. I trust myself to figure it out. I'm smart enough and capable to figure anything out. So I'll be okay."
Yeah. And that's the kind of self-affirmation that you encourage in your clients and I encourage in my clients.
Mhm.
I was thinking about something you said, and I had this image of the blank page. Like when we're looking at the future and it's not conforming to what we thought it would be, we might just see a blank page and feel like we have nothing. But
Mhm.
once we look at that blank page and see it as everything, because we get to decide what goes on that page, what that story is going to be. We get to redesign even when we thought we always had to live in a certain way. Now it's a little scary because it is our decision, but embracing that decision is the power that thriving after marriage crisis can give us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And do you find it like with the population that you work with, Lisa, are most of them hopeful or are they scared and or do you see a lot of negativity? What kind of energy do you see mostly?
So mostly when they come in, they're scared, they're
Mhm.
terrified, and they're sad. They're grieving their marriage. They
Mhm.
know that this has to happen, but they're grieving their marriage and they feel like they have to take care of everybody else first and everybody else's relationship with their spouse. Like I just was off the phone with a client and it was about taking the kid to college for his freshman year. And the husband said, well, we don't really have to go. He can move himself in by himself. And she was like floored because of course she wanted to go. And but then she's like, I told her, you can't control your husband. You can only control yourself. And
Mhm.
she said, but I want my son to have a good relationship with my husband. And I said, it's not your job. It's not your job to make that relationship whole. It's your husband's job. That's it.
Absolutely.
Don't lob in, grenades, but at the same time, you can't control how either of them behaves or feels. So be in charge of yourself.
Absolutely. I think also, look, I recommend all of your viewers and listeners read the work of Pia Melody, who wrote the book Facing Codependence and Intimacy Factor. And she has a book called Facing Love Addiction and a workbook called Breaking Free. Her work, I mention it in my book a lot. I use a lot of her insights in my book. It is the best tool I've ever found that to teach us adults how to overcome our childhood trauma, the emotional and mental immaturity that comes from that, and how to grow ourselves up and to be able to find out who we are and live true to that. And two of its most incredible life changing concepts are managing your self esteem
Mm,
and setting appropriate boundaries. And this is absolutely crucial to be able to be this person that you and I are both talking about, is and the thing about learning her rules of boundaries is you will know when someone else is out of line without question. And you'll know what's your business and what isn't your business. And it's very clear cut. And you learn her boundaries, you will learn, right, that you're not supposed to go around fixing other people's problems, that you
yeah,
focus on yourself. It's sort of
yeah,
like that. The serenity prayer comes from this kind
yeah,
of philosophy, is
yeah,
knowing what's your business and what isn't.
yeah. And what you can control and what you can't control. And letting
Exactly.
go, just letting go of having to control everything. And
Absolutely.
it's a hard thing because we want to believe that we have control, but again, we only have control of ourselves and our own actions. So this idea of getting to know ourselves when you're going through it and afterwards
Mhm.
is the secret sauce to making
Yeah.
the right choices and to feeling like your future is open instead of closed. And that's what I think is the power of your work.
Well, those people out there who've been using other people as their compass, what can I do for my children? How can I make my husband happy or my parents or whatever? I want you to learn to use yourself as your compass. And some people will go, well, I don't know what I want or need. Well, it's time to find out. And the way
Yeah.
you do that is you go out and taste life. And
Yeah.
you probably already know a lot of things about yourself. Like, if you like how you like your hamburgers or hot
Yeah.
dogs or what toppings you want on your pizza. You know some basic things about yourself. And like for me, I love being outdoors. So, if I'm going to a restaurant and it's a pretty day, I want to sit outdoors if they have a patio. It's knowing things like that about yourself. Are you a nature person? Are you a indoor person? Are you a couch potato? Or you like to be outside and active. It's knowing yourself and then doing those things for yourselves that make your heart sing.
Right. Right.
And managing your well-being like a business. And so many people go, well, it's selfish to take care of myself like that. Or, no, absolutely not. It's
Yeah.
absolutely necessary and it should be your priority. And it's a great way to role model for your kids, their
Yeah.
own
I mean,
self-care.
and this is putting your oxygen mask on first. I
Exactly.
wrote a curriculum years ago for parents of kids who were struggling with addiction and mental health illness. And the
Mhm.
title was putting your oxygen mask on first, because you got to take
Absolutely.
care of yourself so that you will be in a better place to take care of the other people. But until you take care of yourself, it's not going to work. And so let's leave on that note. We thrive when we take care of ourselves, when we learn who we are underneath all of the stories and all the layers of messaging we've had. And leaving a marriage can be the hardest, but it also can be the most empowering moment in your life. And it's not
Mhm.
just a moment, it's a lifetime of moments. So thank you so much, Dr. Becky. And
My pleasure.
tell us more. Tell us, how can my audience find you and how can they find your book?
You can find my book at all booksellers like Barnes and Noble and Amazon, and Kindle audiobook and hard copy.
I'll hold it
And
up
go to my website, marriagecrisismanager.com, and you can find out how to contact me there. And please go to Medium and follow Dr. Becky's blog, Becky Whetstone, Dr. Becky, spell out the word doctor. I write everything I know about relationships there, and I tell it like it is. I don't mess around, and a lot of couples get a lot of support, and individuals, learning about how to be healthy as a
there.
individual and couples in that blog. So please go there. And yeah, that's how to find me.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Becky. This is Lisa Lisser, Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter, and you can find me at lzlcoaching.com. Until next time.